Okay, I'd like to commence with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation on whose land this event is being broadcast today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodian of all the lands where you are joining us from today. Feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you would like to do that. And now I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Susan Murray. Susan is the manager and publisher at Sydney University Press and the 2023 winner of the Mike Horsley Award for long-standing dedicated service to the educational publishing industry. She is the commissioning editor for two of the Press's book series, which are Sydney Studies in Australian Literature and Public and Social Policy. She also manages or has managed other publishing projects of the university's Sydney Library, including Sydney Open Journals and the Australian Poetry Library. Murray's path to publishing began with her training as a librarian. Her first job after university was the editorial library of the Sydney Morning Herald before moving to the State Library of New South Wales, where, amongst other things, she introduced the internet to New South Wales parliamentarians in 1993. So something to answer for there, Susan. She joined the University of Sydney Library team and then finally the Sydney University Press, where she has been for the past 16 years. Susan is recognised for her innovation in educational publishing, particularly her work on open access initiatives, and her experience and expertise spans digital transformation, accessibility in publishing, and multi-platform scholarly communication, making her a leading voice in contemporary academic publishing in Australia and overseas. Susan, quite the bio. Welcome to First Friday.
Thanks, Andrew. That makes it all sound very impressive, but it's just work, I guess. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of where I am, which is Randwick, and that's the Gadigal and the Bidjigal people.
Okay, yes. Okay, so we always like to start these off with some questions about how you got there. Now, I've given the audience some idea of the path you took. And it's not unusual for librarians to end up in sort of strange and surprising places in the publishing sector. Um, what do you think it was about your role as a librarian or the training you went that sort of prepared you for the publishing world that you're in now?
I guess it was, I feel like a lot of the career decisions that I was offered and that I took were serendipitous. Just a matter of good timing rather than anything else. Um, as you said, when I was working at the State Library of New South Wales, one day they just said, you're going to take over this thing. You take over the CD-ROMs today, and you become a technical kind of person. And from there, I moved to the library's internet provider. So the State Library of New South Wales was an ISP for a short period of time, and learned about the internet. And then working in the library when I moved to the University of Sydney was looking at the way to pitch the library as a single service to the entirety of the university. So at the time when I started, there were 24 different locations of libraries across the campuses, and 24 different websites. And so the first one was to bring all of that together into one website that sort of showed that. But that brought into the idea of what services are we offering and is there consistency in them? And so when the library decided to restart Sydney Uni Press in 2003, the library was reassessing the services that we offered to academic staff. As the collection became more electronic, particularly journals, we felt like we were losing touch with the researchers because we were delivering everything to them to their desktop. And so we thought more about how we could support research and what expertise the library had. And it turned out that digitization and electronic publishing were the first steps at that time. And so we created the university repository where academics could store their open access articles, and SUP was set up for publishing new books. And as for me, at the time, as I said, I was the web developer, but I was also halfway through an MBA. So I was looking at that combination of technology, business, and library background. And so that it was a good fit to sort of move into publishing.
It's really interesting, because we were talking just before we came on that you've been at Sydney University Press since its re-inception. Um, what were some of the really difficult decisions you had to make back when starting up a whole publishing arm?
Uh, it's the same decision that's difficult all the time, which is what to publish. Um, we made a conscious decision that we weren't going to limit our publishing program just to Sydney academics. So the authors can be from anywhere in the country or, in fact, anywhere in the world. And so we were really looking for things that were that had no or very little opportunity to be picked up and published by anyone else. So uh, looking at things that were interesting, but it also meant that I had a much more informal sort of peer review process. If a manuscript or a proposal came into me, and really for the first 2 to 3 years, it was just me doing it all. Um, I had to find, if something came in that I needed, professional, technical, academic expertise on, I had to go and find that person and say, would you be willing to advise me about, the research quality of this work? So that was a very difficult part of the process.
Yes, yeah. What do you, before we get on to the actual nuts and bolts of the university press system, what do you really like about your job?
Oh, the best thing is learning about everything that's going on and that new research that's coming through. Um, we have 9 series, and obviously I don't work on all of the books, but normally I get a chance to read through or to do some kind of work on each book. But we have to be an ambassador for them. And so I think it's really exciting to be able to sort of go out and talk to people and say, oh, well, we're publishing this book and it's about aquariums in Victorian England, and just the role that had when it was so amazing to the idea of bringing the sea inside, and that so many people in that era would not have been to the seaside even, let alone seen fish that weren't on a plate. um, and to be able to just sort of find these interesting stories and then go and tell other people about them. So there's always something that's coming through that's really interesting. And I'm, a voracious reader, and I love sort of learning new things all the time. And I think that's another kind of librarian trait, is that you have a shallow knowledge about a whole bunch of different things. So that sort of keeps me interested all the time.
Yeah, look, there's obvious joy in your voice at the discovery of new things and, new topics and new ideas and things you've never thought about. But let's get on to the publishing, because in commercial publishing, often it is a question of money. These are businesses and they need to be able to make money to survive, to be able to go on to be publishers. What is it that drives a university press, and in this case, Sydney University Press?
Our mission is to build on the university's reputation as a global research intensive institution. So there needs to be a research component in the books that we consider for publication. And the way that we're set up, we do have to cover our operating costs, but the library pays our salary. So we're administratively part of the library. Um, but we do have to make money. So there is a component of selection and acquisition that's about, will this sell and to what audiences? but it's nowhere near the precision that's required by trade publishers, where you have to, have those figures and audiences and social media followers already set in place. Um, Book proposals come either to the SUP contact or to the series editor.
Mhm.
Um, and if something comes to me, I'll read it and do some preliminary work to see if I think it's interesting and if it aligns with the series. And then I send it on to the series editor with my comments. Um, the series editor does their read and uses the series board for peer review. And then if they want to support it, it goes to SUP's editorial advisory board, which is made up of academics across the university, but not necessarily in the fields that we publish. They all have their own experiences as authors and readers. Um, and then that kind of a discussion at board is about balance in the series. How does this book fit into a series? For example, in recent years, we've been trying to showcase women writers in the Australian literature series that I manage. So we've had books on Gal Jones and Eleanor Dark and Eliza Hamilton Dunlop. Um, so there's a number of processes that go into a publishing decision, but it is much more of a balance towards the research impact and that kind of the reading audience than the commercial success.
Yeah. How big is Sydney University Press? How many works would you publish in a typical year?
Um, Between 12 and 15, so we're pretty small. It's been less in recent years, so that's another thing we're trying to manage, is how to keep new titles coming through, keep everything in sequence, get the authors to submit once we've accepted, and yeah, keep everything going. We're a team of 5, so we're fairly small in that sense. I'd like to be doing more books per year, just to keep the revenue turning over.
So you publish, upwards of a dozen every year.
Yeah.
How many would you read? How many new works, submitted works would you read in a typical year?
Uh, I'd read at least half of those, and I will have flicked through. I always have a final look through the PDF to see that everything looks okay at the end.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Do you do any commissioning? Like, do you go searching for works? If there's a part of your mission or part of the things that you're trying to achieve isn't landing on your desk?
Well, with the series that I work with, I meet with my series editors every month or so. So I would have a coffee with them and talk about what they know about what's new and what's coming through. With Australian literature, I've been a member of the Association for the Study of Australian Literature, so I get their newsletter about what things are happening, what research projects are going on. I also attend the conference, the annual conference each year. And so that's a way of me seeing someone give a paper on something and get a sense of, are there new themes coming through? In Australian literature, there's a lot of ecological sort of climate fiction. So that, they're the kind of things that we think about that I might then discuss with the series editor and say, should we be finding someone to do an edited collection, or is there one researcher who could do a book as we're going through. So I'm keeping on top with public policy, my other series, just reading the news and the newsletters and the research institutes in other universities. So the UNSW has a great social policy research institute. I keep in touch with them and know those kind of things. Also with the with policy, we have an open textbook that we originally did as a research project, that's turned into an open textbook for all Australian universities. And so it has 38 authors across all of the unis. And originally we worked with a couple of Sydney academics, but they've now sort of given the editorship to the Teaching and Learning arm of the Political Sciences Association. And that's a way of them sort of keeping control of the content that helps with their teaching, But that also connects me to a number of people that I can then call on as well in my other sort of public policy hat. Knowing those has been helpful as well.
Yeah. Now, the model that Sydney University follows is not the model for all academic publishers. Can you sort of give us some ideas of how other university presses work?
Yeah, they're all very different. um, they all have different business models depending on how much their university is willing to support them. As I said, the Sydney Library supports our salaries. At one end, there's like ANU Press, which is fully funded and fully open access. And that's, taking their research reputation goal to their natural endpoint. Because of that, they only publish their own academics. But that is maybe something that's likely to change. They've just got a new publisher that's coming through. And at the other end of the spectrum, UNSW Press or New South is fully commercial. They're a business owned by a foundation that's owned by the university. So there's kind of a bit of arm's length there for it. But because of that, because they need to, fund everything, they have three arms of their business. They have the university bookshop, so they sell textbooks to the students. They have their publishing arm, and they also run a sales and distribution service for other publishers, including SUP. And so they have sales reps that go out to bookshops and pre-sell into that kind of thing as well. So they're a completely commercial operation. The others have varying support. So UWA has some support, but they also do regional publishing. So in some ways, they're much like a US small university press that publishes for their community as well as for the academic audience.
Mhm.
I know that I think you had someone from UQP on recently. So, they have children's books and poetry and the First Nations series.
Hmm.
So, that not only are they different in business models, but they're also different in publishing scope and where they go.
Yes, I think we had Gail Kennedy in a Spotlight On series that we run, who was published by Queensland University Press. It seems that even though there would seem to be a natural competition between university presses and publishers in general, for eyeballs and readership and time and money, that there's also a closeness between the university presses where they do work together or at least talk to each other. Is that true?
Yes, very much so. And in fact, I saw another university publisher is listening in today in the audience. But yes, we do meet, regularly. Roxanne Missingham, who was the uni librarian at ANU, was really good about um, getting everybody together to talk about ways that we could share and collaborate. There's also the Scholarly and Journals Committee, a subcommittee of the APA, where we're members. The uni presses are members there. So again, that's a committee that's made up of big and small because the others are the big scholarly journal publishers like Nature and Springer and Taylor and Francis and those kind of things. But we do publish, we do meet and collaborate, and yeah, people tend to be very generous in sort of sharing what they've learned and what they're doing.
Does that generosity of spirit extend outside of us of Australia? Do you have connections with international university presses?
Um, yes, it's generally you can. I went to Frankfurt Book Fair several years ago, and tacked on a trip to the UK and went to visit Liverpool Uni Press and Bristol. And they were very open about what what challenges they saw and what they were doing and things like that. So yeah, it is kind of good in that way that they don't see you as, a competitor that they can't share any information with.
Wow. Now, one of the values that Sydney University Press puts forward is the belief that books have the ability to change the world, which is probably something most of our audience believes wholeheartedly. How does this impact the way that you operate as a publisher?
I guess that is you, what happens in the selection process, but also in the way that we might market the book to the audiences. I guess the public policy series is a good example of that. The first book we did on childcare back in the late thousands critiqued the rise of for-profit childcare centres. And the authors made sure that Julia Gillard, who was then the education minister, got a copy and was also briefed about it. One of the editors actually was Barbara Pocock, who is
Mhm.
now one of the senators for South Australia, and she's still very involved in this. So some of the ideas in that book did make it into policy, such as the idea of minimum qualifications for carers. Um, and so we do try and see that there is these kind of real world impacts that go through. A more recent book was on universities and their role in the public good. And we were lucky to get Mary Casey, who was working on that initiative for Universities Australia to launch the book and to become really familiar with the topics within it, so that that was a sort of an informal way that the university could be involved in that discussion process.
Ah, how do you balance then you said that the university press, Sydney University Press needs a research component, or it's a very strong part of your what brings an author in to your thing. What about the audience? Where do they come in the selection process?
Mm. It is a juggle. Um, I guess it's one of the advantages of having series. We tend to look at the audience of a series overall, as well as for individual titles. Um, I guess I'm thinking about um, archaeology, of which we have several series, but one of them is called Adapa Monographs, which is on Middle Eastern archaeology. And the first book in that series was called The Ebb and Flow of the Ghurud Empire. And it wasn't a great seller. But it's about a 12th century dynasty that ruled quite a lot of the land that's now Afghanistan and Iran, but extended all the way up into the Stans and across to India and Nepal. So it wasn't a well known topic, but it was a fascinating book. And in a way, that showed our intent for looking for books that fitted this scope of Middle Eastern archaeology. The university has digs in Pella, in Jordan, and in Cyprus. So it's a very active area of research for us. But what that helped was that we are attracting other books into that series that do have a broader audience as well. So we're trying to build it through the series.
Okay. Okay. You've mentioned a couple of times the digital scope of it, and that, obviously, you're responsible for everything every parliamentarian has ever Googled. Um,
Themselves. They wanted to find
they
themselves.
wanted to find themselves. Why not? Why not? What has been the main impact of the digital revolution and the internet on academic publishing?
um, I think it's there's good and bad aspects of it.
Well, let's
Um,
start with the good. Let's be positive. Let's start with
with
the
the
good.
good,
In the good.
it does mean that it's much easier to find a global audience um, by selling to libraries. So a traditional academic publishing process would work on the idea that you would sell 300 to 500 copies to libraries around the world, and that would sort of cover your costs, and everything else was a bit of icing on the top. The average sale of an academic book is now around 200 to 250 copies. This is print, but we also have so many more options in terms of distribution. So we sell the ebook edition to the libraries, but some libraries might still buy a print copy. And in fact, with digital print on demand, which again has come a long way in the last 20 years, we now are doing print on demand hardcovers. So we've got a printer that will do single copies in hardcover.
Wow.
And so we're testing the waters with that, in that if we do a hardcover release as well as a paperback release, maybe that's something that libraries would be interested in. So, and I guess the production side of it, we, for the majority of the sort of text heavy scholarly titles, we have an online layout system. So we basically upload Word files, and it formats them in the background, and we can generate pages from there. We can, from that system, we can do print PDFs, online PDFs, websites, EPUB 2, EPUB 3, Mobi for Kindle, all of the different formats. And so it makes it really easy for us. We only change things in one place, and then we just regenerate the files whenever we need them. So it's made it much easier for us to work with things and to update things or make corrections. And that really helps make the process smoother. Um, yeah, as I said, you're getting a wider audience because you can sell to that. You can also sell at different price points as well. So we might sell, even with books that we're giving away through open access, we're giving away a format, we'd still sell a print copy, and we might sell a low cost EPUB copy via Google or Apple, so that if you want your own personal version rather than a unwieldy PDF, you can do that as well. So it does allow us to have a lot of different ways to generate revenue too.
Yeah. I don't know if you'll be able to. Can you give us an example of a work that sort of had its life transformed by being digital that perhaps would never have had the success it had if it was restricted just to print, that found a life in the online
Hmm.
world?
Um, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I definitely think with open access,
Hmm. Something that
uh,
found something that like found an audience in the online world that possibly it would not have found anywhere else.
so I was just thinking, Simon Chapman, the tobacco control researcher, has been one of our authors for a long time. And one of the books we converted to open access for him was a book that he did back in 99 on gun control. So at the time he did some public, he was, he's basically a public policy, public health researcher, did some research into the Port Arthur massacre and the effect of gun control on that. And now that book is available open access via the university repository and other kind of channels. Every time something happens, um, he gets more downloads of that book. And that for him is impact. So he watches the downloads and he'll tweet that, or message it on social media saying, X many thousand people have also downloaded this book, to give you different things. That's the one,
Yeah.
Over Our Dead Bodies.
Oh yeah, yeah. Which gets back to the ability of books to change the world, I think, if
Mm.
the right people are reading them. There's been some questions there coming into the chat about open access, and we're going to get to that. But I want to just stick with the digital world for a little bit longer. Where do you think it's going to lead into the future? A lot of writers, um, fear is not the right word, but they're quite wary of the digital world, and especially with the ongoing rise of AI, and the impact that it may have on them as writers. Where do you see the digital revolution in any respect, taking the university press?
It is something that worries me. We haven't agreed to license any of our content out to the AI language models as yet. We know that a lot of them have been taken anyway.
Mhm.
So, but there doesn't seem, I'm waiting for a class action. I'm happy to jump on a class action to sort of work out how that goes through. With our academic authors, to some degree, exposure of their ideas, as long as they're accredited to them, um, is something that they want. They want to be known in that field, and so that's why open access appeals to quite a few of them. So yes, I don't know. I feel that this is it's quite a fraught area about where things are heading in the future. I have had a few manuscript proposals that were obviously written by AI, and you can tell because they're incredibly simplistic. Um, Maybe that's just because it's early days, and I know that Claude and things like that can write like Ezra Klein or write like a certain author. You can feed that stuff in, but yeah, I think it will make it harder for academics to uh, identify and sort of consolidate a space within the research space that's their field. I think their niche could be quite difficult.
Yeah, it's a threat that I think is going to be with us for quite some years until we can figure out an answer to it. And perhaps there's people sitting on the chat here who are also going to line up for that class action that you're going to join with them
Yeah,
when the time comes. You've mentioned open access a couple of times, and one of the things that anyone who's sort of been to university remembers fondly is the enormous access you got as a university student to, to the library and to journals and to so on, and that it then disappeared when you were no longer a student. Can you just describe what is open access publishing as it relates to Sydney University Press?
sure. So it's making an electronic version of the book openly available to read and download. For us, it's usually the PDF. And as I said, we still sell the print and ebook editions, albeit at a lower price. So it might be a couple of bucks, up to $5 for an OA EPUB. But you can download the PDF and get the whole thing as you're going through. It's usually for academic authors who are interested in increasing the availability of their ideas and less interested in the commercial aspects or in print. It also is a way that you can incorporate more digital aspects into a book. We do use it a lot in our Indigenous music, language, and performing arts series.
Mhm.
And that might be through having supplementary information like music, audio files, or video files. And in the ebook, they can be embedded into the file, or we have our own kind of open library, which is where we have our OA books, but also supplementary information so that you can stream the music that goes with a particular chapter or something like that.
Yeah. How do you make the decision as to when you mentioned that some of the series sort of lend themselves towards open access? Do authors want to be open access? Is something that they all want to be, or is it very much a horses for courses?
Yeah, it's a discussion with the author as to what they want and how they see it fitting into their sort of communication of their ideas.
Hmm.
Um, as I mentioned, Simon is always watching his downloads and his stats, and he thinks that that's a real measure of success. There's definitely um, other authors on campus and further afield that are really interested in open access. Um, Sorry, I've lost your question.
No, no, that's all right. Is there a financial impact to those authors who want to go open access? Like, are they giving up some of the financial return of their
Yeah,
book? Or
yeah. So our website would say that we would ask for a subvention. So that would be, from a couple of $1,000 up to 10 or 12 if it's a very complex book, to defray some of the costs. Um, but that's not always, it's a discussion that we have to have with them about what they can do. They might look into other options. There are grants that they can apply for through the Academy of the Humanities, or library-based programs like JSTOR's Path to Open, which we are a member of, where JSTOR pays the publisher for exclusive ebook access, and then opens the book after a 3-year embargo. So that's another way that we might talk about it with them. We might agree on an embargo ourselves. Like I say, well, maybe not on release, but after 12 months. If the research was done with ARC grants, with Research Council grants, they have to be open after 12 months. So that might be part of the contract right from the beginning, or it might be further. I am looking at our backlist now as to whether or not, like, we could have a path to open access for all of our books, which says, once the royalties start to dry up,
Mhm.
um, you know, we could convert your books to open access. And in fact, the Celtic Studies series, we took over, I think, at book 19. So they already had 18 books that they had published in print only. And with some of them, we're making them open access because they've seen that, other, what they would consider inferior work is getting cited more often than theirs because it's not as available. So, the Celtic Studies Foundation and the Medieval Centre decided that that was a strategy that they would do to sort of, again, as you say, reinvigorate those books and open their research to the wider audience.
Yeah. You mentioned JSTOR. Could you just explain what JSTOR is?
Oh, JSTOR is one of the big library ebook and e-journal vendors. So it's run by the Ithaca Foundation in New York. So there's basically EBSCO, ProQuest, and JSTOR are the three main places that libraries would buy, scholarly libraries would buy ebooks and e-journals from.
Okay. And they have an open access. They have some books there, some journals there that are also open access.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So libraries can buy our books through that, but some would be, if we made a book open access on release, we can still load it to their platform, but we have to pay them a fee. I think it's only $100 or something like that. So that, but again, when you want the research to be somewhere where people are searching as well. So a student would consider JSTOR a database that they would go and do their research questions on, and then they get a variety of book chapters and journal articles that answer their research topic. So you want the content to be there.
Yeah. Are you seeing authors pulling away from open access, given what you were saying about AI and the theft of ideas, etc.? Is that something that's a concern?
I haven't had any experience of that directly, um, because I think the risk is just as great for um, you know any anything that's digital, or anything that's published can be pirated. The book that we have on dingoes on Kagari um, keeps popping up on pirated websites, and we try and get it taken down, and it just appears again. And it's literally someone has scanned the book and put it up, and that's the way a lot of those things happen. So piracy was happening before AI, and
Indeed.
they're just challenges you have to try and deal with.
Yeah. You've mentioned a number of times a couple of the different series that you are in charge of, public policy and Australian literature, with Sydney Studies of Australian Literature. How difficult is to manage two series that on the face of it seem to be very different in tone?
Uh, it just I just allocate different parts of the week to them. my thoughts of
Simple as that.
different things.
So it's Monday, it must be public policy, is it?
That's right. Friday, when the Ages book list comes out, then I change my head to Australian literature, or as other things are coming up, I'm always sort of switching between different things.
Yeah. Are there series that you think you'd like to investigate going into the future? I mean, how does a new series come into being? What's its inception?
Um, it's a combination of us going out and trying to find new things, and also trying to get academics to pitch a new series to us. Um, some of it is builds on things that have already happened. So the series that we have that's called China and the West in the Modern World is about cultural history and China in Chinese people in the diaspora. Um, but after having done a few books that have been very different within that series, we got a pitch for a more of a Chinese people in Australia, Chinese history in Australia, and
Mhm.
we didn't end up going ahead with it, but we're still getting books that kind of fit that scope that we're just putting into China and the West. So you sometimes when you start publishing in a field, you can kind of see that there's a way to branch off into a different area. Um, Other things that we've considered is like a short book policy series, Policy in Your Pocket. There's the James Martin Policy Institute and there's the Sydney Policy Lab. And so there's lots of policy research happening in the uni. And the other big area I'd love to get into is public health. So
Mhm.
the Charles Perkins Centre, Steve Simpson was never my friend, but I'm hoping that whoever's taking over after that, I can, reconnect. The School of Public Health has lots of really interesting stuff. And I think that that kind of thing that brings research to the wider audience, to bringing it to general people, I think would be really interesting to do.
Yes. Okay, we've got questions coming in from the audience, so we might come to a couple of those. Karen wants to know, is there an Australian university press which focuses or has a series on visual art books, visual art history?
Visual arts. Probably Melbourne, under their Magana press imprint would be the closest thing in a uni press. The Uni of Melbourne got a bequest back in the 70s and started the Magana imprint, and so they do beautiful books. Um, and we are, well, not SUP, but the university library is doing a book with them at the moment on the Giorgione sketch that we found during COVID. And so so there's a lot of art in that kind of thing, but they do, yes, quite beautiful books for those kind of things.
Okay, then. That sounds an interesting story. Have you got 2 minutes on that?
Um,
Discovery of a sketch during COVID,
During
leading.
COVID,
Yeah.
so I don't know if maybe it was found just before, but anyway, we've had a big project in the library to catalogue the rare books collection because basically we have this amazing collection of unique material that's not in the general catalogue. It would only be in finding aids or in stuff that you could, lists of items and things like that, because it's all by who donated it, not by topic or anything like that. So we've had this program running for 5 or 6 years now to catalogue that collection. Someone opened the book and found this red chalk drawing in the back of it that they thought that had some information with it that suggested that it was by Giorgione, and it has actually helped to consolidate the date of his death and other kind of details from it. So it was really quite an extraordinary discovery. And eventually they sent the book to Melbourne to have it scanned in one of those high, micro scanning things to establish the date of the chalk on the paper and all of those kind of things. So there's a whole book that's coming out about the research that's gone in to that. The uni librarian Philip Kent took it to the Vatican a couple of years ago to see how it matched with other material in their collection. So yeah, so there's just these amazing materials in rare books that we're discovering all the time. Um, and we now have a dedicated team that is digitizing some of these unique materials so that we can bring them to a wider audience.
Yes. Jill had a question similar to Karen's on visual arts, but on poetry. I know that you've been connected to the Poetry Foundation in the past. Um, are there universities that do focus on poetry, university presses?
Um, I'd say UQP does some, but also I don't know if you exactly call them a university press, but Giramondo out at the University of Western Sydney does poetry. Um,
And that.
yeah.
Okay. Yes. The other questions have come in. I think, again, I think it's from Karen, who's been very active. Do you take submissions? And if so, what sort of format do they need to be in?
There's a proposal form on our website. So there's a section for authors that has a proposal form that asks a bunch of questions. So it's just a Word document that you can fill in. Um, there's some things, if you're not an academic, then some of the questions about grant funding and that are, you can just skip over those. But just looking at where you see your story fitting into a book series, and then the series editors. So I saw that there was a question as well about where are the series, the list of 9 series, which
Yeah.
again is a menu option on
Yes.
the,
You've
the
put that
top.
link into the chat. Yep.
Yeah. Was that another great way, if you think it fits within one of that, is to contact the series editor and say, look, I'm thinking about submitting a proposal. This is the scope of my topic. Do you think that this would fit? Before you go into the thing of filling out a multi-page Word document of all of the bits and pieces. But yeah, some of it comes from a discussion in the first case about, I'm thinking about this, how would it be like? We don't have hard and fast word count rules. Most of the books are somewhere between 90 and 120,000 words, but we have done a few longer ones when the subject matter requires it. And also, as I said, because we have the open library and the website, we can put supplementary information like appendices and other bits and pieces on the website to download if people don't have that kind of thing. And that works with some of the public health books as well. So that our biggest seller for a long time was actually a book called Stepping On, which is a falls prevention program for elderly people. And so physios and OTs do the training to teach programming in the community on strength training for older people so that they don't fall, how to get up and get out of a chair, how to step up and down on the gutter, those types of things. And so there's lots of supplementary information there's lots of handouts and things like that for the exercises that are on the website as well. So trying to keep all of those kind of things together.
You've mentioned that you hope maybe in the future that Sydney University Press will move into the public health. We have had a question about public health research in Timor-Leste. Is there a university that sort of focuses on the Indo-Pacific or Asian or public health areas?
Ah, is Julia still here? I think Monash have an Indonesian thing, Southeast Asian series, so it might fit into something like that.
Which is interesting. How difficult is it for a non academic, so current academic, someone working at a university, to be published by a university press?
Uh, Reasonably hard. I mean,
Hmm?
uh, we have published books by independent researchers. I mean, I think that at times, like people move out of academia, but they're still researching. So I don't know if the Independent Scholars Association still exists, but definitely we've done books with the Independent Scholars Association in the past and those kind of things. But it's just, um, I guess we haven't, although I am interested in that line between what is a scholarly nonfiction book and what is a trade nonfiction book. Um, I think that there are academics who can write for a very broad audience, and obviously those books are very successful. Um, we haven't had a lot of scope for that in the past, but maybe in the future, if our publishing program changes and I'd really like our commissioning editor, senior commissioning editor, Naomi Van Grol. I've talked with her about the idea of her having a more active role out on campus, talking to people about their books and trying to bring them to SUP.
Okay. Do you ever have conversations with your academic authors about the suitability of a book, maybe moving into that more trade or general reading audience?
Oh, about how to change
Yeah.
the writing. Uh,
Well,
yeah,
just the possibility that like this is a great book, but with some changes, it could be like a massive seller of a book in a different publishing world, so to speak.
we have, and sometimes those conversations can be very strange because, I mean, we've had some authors who wanted to write the scholarly book and then rewrite it completely for a trade audience. And then it turned out that we didn't get the trade book, we got the scholarly one. Um, but yeah, I do think there's that. I think the other thing I was going to mention was that there's a couple of things on our blog. There's one post that Agata Merva Montoya, who's now teaching in the Masters of Publishing program, wrote about how to convert your thesis to a book. That sort of talks about how to strip out all of the really dry stuff that makes up a thesis and how to build it into something that can be a more accessible reading book. We definitely would work with authors, particularly a single authored work, on how to make it flow. So some structural editing work about how to bring it up to this so that people will read the next chapter in the same way, a similar way that you would do with fiction or trade nonfiction. You're talking about how to structure the story so that it flows throughout the whole thing. And even with edited collections, we would talk with the editors about the order of chapters so that it flows in a logical way and makes it easier for readers.
To come through.
Yeah.
What do you think? We're coming towards the end, and fascinating. I think I could talk for hours, but what do you think are what's the number one myth about university presses that you hear people talking about at the numerous cocktails you no doubt go to as an academic?
um, I don't know that I don't. I mean, I think the trouble that we have is that in a lot of fields they look overseas. They think that Australian uni presses are not good enough um,
And you
to.
reject that, one would assume,
Sorry,
and you reject that.
I do reject that. We spend a lot of time in quality control. In one of the other questions, a book. I talked about how it gets laid out, and normally we would have uh, an external copy editor, an external proofreader, an author read, and then an in-house proofread, and then an index, and then a final check. So we do spend a lot of time, and apart from those sort of part of those sort of external bits has been more about staffing than we would like to, but really we do spend a lot of time with every book making everything perfect. And the trouble is when to stop. You can keep tweaking something forever, but we do try to, quality control is really important to us. And now that we have, trade distribution and deals with distribution in the UK and Europe and Middle East, we we do feel like we can pitch our books to the world. I find it kind of annoying that someone would go to a second tier, you know, US college press to be published, and then find that their book isn't distributed in Australia. So that's, I sometimes get academics coming and saying, I published with this overseas press and they don't distribute to Australia. Will you take stock of my book and sell it in Australia? Which I say no to now, but I would have done that in the past. I'm very bad at saying no. But those kind of things is like, well, shouldn't you have thought of that before you published with them? If like they're not, it's not going to get to your readers if they're not going to distribute it in your own country. So yeah, so those kind of things, you're always trying to say, we're trying to do the best books we can and bring them to the readers where they are. So, yep.
Okay. Well, we do have, I think, time for one more question, and it's from Lee. And it's do you have suggestions for an author collecting lived experience stories with the aim of influencing public policy on their topic in terms of university press? Like, is it essential to be an academic researcher in a formal sense, or do you just need to follow the, I suppose, the way in which academic research takes place?
That is an interesting one. With that, I'd be trying to get some academic content into it as well. So if you're able to splice up the lived experience with some academic content to kind of give it imprimatur. We're doing a book on motherhood at the moment, or I'm waiting for the final version of the manuscript. And that has been a bit of that kind of thing. Particularly, we've worked with them to ensure that there was a First Nations motherhood chapter in it, and incorporating First Nations knowledge is one of the big challenges that we have now. We're always trying to find ways to bring cultural sensitivities into the books. So there's the thing where I think lived experience stories is like, this is how it actually works in the real world, but to temper it with some, this is what the research says, so that we can feel like we're fulfilling our mission as well as bringing those stories out.
Okay, I think that's a nice note to end on. Susan, we've come to the end of our time. That's an hour. It has absolutely flown by. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone in the audience who joined in. It was great to see so many of you online and so many questions coming through. If you're not already subscribed to Newsbite, that's our weekly email newsletter that tells you what's happening. Please do so. You can do that again through our website, and we'll also get linked up to all the other services and opportunities for writers across the state that we have. Again, at writingnewsouthwales.org.au. Thank you again, Susan. Thank you very much. It's been absolutely fascinating to see the world of university press publishing and Sydney University Press in particular. I wish everyone a good weekend, and we'll see you at the next First Friday. Farewell.